This podcast is brought to you by Trivelo Coaching, where we help triathletes and cyclists like you train smarter to race faster. I'm your host, Jordan Donnelly, and on my left is former Australian Ironman Champion and head coach of Trivelo Coaching, Gerard Donnelly. The 2025 Tour de France had everything. Chaos, crashes and tactics that sometimes left us shaking our heads, but from Wout's monster finale, stages that felt like one-day classics, and teams burning matches way too early sometimes. Today we want to break down the moves that made and broke this tour, why some teams succeeded and some failed, and how do you actually beat Pogacar. Get ready for a breakdown of training and racing strategy, drama, and a little controversy. And I want to preface this by saying, this is just unsolicited advice from us on the couch peloton, as they say. We're just looking from our armchair expert position, giving our thoughts on the stage. But the man next to me is a proven winner, former Australian Ironman champion, and 16-time Australian time trial, road race, crit race champion, and we probably won a million other club races, and so does know how to win. And so I want to extract the coach's thoughts here of how the race unfolded and his insight into some of the cycling racing strategy. Into the episode. Dad, welcome back to an episode. What an epic 3 weeks, and it continues with the Tour de France Femmes, which is on straight away. It started on Saturday night, which we're eagerly watching, especially after our interview with Sarah last week of her third place at the Giro. She's aiming for some good mountain stages coming up, so we're glad that SBS continues to show that for us. But what a 3 weeks. I just want to drive straight into the last stage. God, I think everyone around the world, including us, was screaming at the TV for Wout.
I know, and I felt almost bad for Pog, but why should I when he's dominating so much? And it was so good, whether you like Wout van Aert or not. Most people would have been cheering for the underdog, and for someone to finally crack Pog, and there's a lot of reasons that you could actually give to why that happened, why that occurred. But the main thing is that, man on man for one stage there, you would back Pog every time. And you can't underestimate the mental fortitude of Wout van Aert to really dig deep and get that gap, which ended up being a winning gap at the end where it counted. And, could it have been Pog was just so exhausted from 3 weeks of, defending every single challenge that was thrown at him, and Wout didn't have such as hard a tour, but it doesn't matter. It's the stage is there to be won, and it doesn't matter what form you come into on that day. It's who's the better on the day. And it was just brilliant to see Wout. Him and Ingebrigtsen are our favourite sons, and it was really good to see Wout come home with an epic victory. And you could tell it meant so much to him. And it was similar to the Strade Bianche when he finished in Siena there. It was those two victories really standout performances for people who've been writing Wout off. Van der Poel's so much better than him now, and all these sentences. When you see him do those two stages, just remind you that he's not done with yet, and he's got plenty of fight left in him.
Yeah, not just the Strade Bianche Classic, but the Strade Bianche Giro stage as well, which is that epic finish. And that was a win that he had coming for so long. But I loved it. The reporter asked him afterwards, was this a stage that you mapped out for the tour? You really eyed off this one? He said, yes, this one plus the 20 stages beforehand, And he's going, I've had quite a disappointing tour, to be honest. And he felt like he had not performed himself in terms of his own abilities, but also not been able to help the team as much as he wanted. So it did mean a lot to him. And my thoughts on this last stage, when they first said they're getting rid of the Champs-Élysées sprint, I said, I don't care if people say it's boring. It's such great tradition. It's just so good to see them roll in. They kind of deserve that. The sprinters deserve that tradition at the end of the tour after such a grueling 3 weeks. But yeah, the stage completely proved me wrong. I am all on board this. It was so exciting. It was like a one-day classic, a world champs race. It was unbelievable, and really smart decision to neutralize the race with 50k to go. So anyone that wanted to race, they could. Anyone that wanted to play it safe, they could. And it just turned into an epic last 50k. And I hope they keep that, or at least alternate between it.
Yeah, look, the sprinters are the only ones who have been really disappointed, and some of the teams would have been really against that because their only option was to have a sprint finish. And let's face it, when Pog's dominating the race so much, you don't want to give him another opportunity to win another stage. And I think I would kind of agree with that. But Wout van Aert's credit, he upstaged them all, and it would have taken a mighty effort for him to drop Pog, and not many people can say they've done that on a climb. And it did remind me of the World Championships at Glasgow with Matthew van der Poel, and there was 4 or 5 of them all attacking each other on that circuit when they did that main climb. I don't know, it seemed like about 15 or 20 times, and it was really a race of attrition. And that last stage in Paris was the same, and it was great that they used the Olympic Games venue, and boy, some of the crowds, that section where there was 90 deep row of on the hill where
Insane.
They came up, and I was listening to Geraint Thomas saying, the interviewer was asking him, would you have rather have come into the Champs-Elysees on your last ever Tour de France? And he said, yeah, I thought that exactly. I was really disappointed. I wanted to get the emotion of my first Tour de France, and here is my last Tour de France. And he said, but you know what? When I went past that hill and the whole crowd erupted, he said, I'll never forget that as long as I live. And he said, there might have been a few guys behind me getting the crowd razzed up, and I think that's what actually happened. A few of his opposition teammates were really hanging out to get Geraint the send-off that he wanted. And when you hear riders talk like that, and he said, look, it was a really scary stage and, quite dangerous, but he said, you know what, it was worth it. It was, I'll never forget that stage as long as I live. And he said, I'll remember all the the good things about the Tour, but I'll never forget that stage. That was epic.
The cliff, once Van Aert had broken away and they'd crested that last climb, and then it's quite a descent back to the Champs-Elysees, and as it gets more and more into the descent, he's going 45, 50, 55, 60, 65, 70. Oh, that is just heart in your mouth, going, oh, please don't crash. And also for Pog as well, who was chasing him down. I'm going, oh, please don't. I know it's neutralized, but please don't crash here and wreck yourself. And what would happen if Pog crashed and couldn't get back on his bike to finish the race? I mean, it's neutralized, but you've got across the finish line to get your win. So his directors must have been watching, going, "Oh, we love you, but Jesus, this is risky."
Get the whole peloton, behind him, pushing him, because no one would want to win when he crashes on the last day. And look, the wet cobbles were really dangerous. And you and I have ridden on wet cobbles, and it's you've come down on them yourself, and it's so easy. It's like ice skating, and it was pretty scary, heart in your mouth stuff. But it was an epic finish, and it was it was a great tour, and there were lots. I think it was a lot better tour than it's been in a long time, because they got rid of those ridiculous, boring 210k stages where the break went up the road. It was all scripted, and it came down. You could watch the last kilometre and see who won, and this time almost every stage had an opportunity for someone, and ironically 14 teams missed out on doing something, but there was an opportunity there, and I think it reminded me a lot of the Giro. That's why I love the Giro, and the Welter, because they don't do this neutralized stuff, let the break go up the road. let's let everybody look at the scenery. I don't think that's what it's meant to be. I think people will eventually stop watching if they're going to do a lot of those stages, and I think they did the right thing. It was great.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because a lot of people just look at the GC and go, it was an absolute washout, so how could it be exciting? But it was all the other stages that made it really exciting. Although I will say we do have short memories, because a couple of years ago I remember thinking, geez, I don't remember the Tour being this hard, and all the flat stages. My memory is all the flat stages being really boring, which 20 years ago I think they were kind of nullified stages. And then last year I remember listening to a podcast, and they were saying, far out, we've never seen a Tour de France this hard before in the first week. This is just absolute mayhem. And I remember making a note of it, thinking, I wonder if the same thing's going to happen next year. And sure enough, the first week everyone's saying the same thing. We've never seen a Tour de France this hard. So I think the level is just getting higher and higher, and there's no room for anything boring or anything remotely nullified or flat anymore. But also, I think the Tour is just a really hard race, and every year we get 21 different stories in a row from 21 different stages, which is just incredible. The last point I wanted to make on the last stage was you saw Wout's cobble skill coming into one of the final corners when the chase was still on to getting back. He had 7 seconds on Pogacar, Mohoric, and Jorgensen, and he went around the corner, coming off the really fast descent, really late on the brakes. You could hear the squealing brakes on the TV, and he went around that corner, and I thought, I wonder how fast they're going to go around the corner. Came out of the corner, and he had 12 or 14 seconds. He put 6 or 8 seconds into them around that corner, and just knowing the cobbles. And he was already, I think, going to stay away that 7 seconds, but that solidified it.
Yeah, and look, coming from Belgium, you don't or can't underestimate the skills that a lot of the Belgian riders, when they're so used to riding cobbles in crap conditions, in rain, wet, icy, slippery. It's not like they ride the cobbles in training all the time, but they've grown up riding these cobbles. So they have, and he is a really great cyclocross rider in his own right. So, you underestimate the skills that these guys have got. And we can't see, it's like watching Grand Prix car racing. You can't really see what 300 kilometers an hour looks like on the telly. It's just, until you stand there and watch them go past you, it's quite scary how fast these guys are riding.
Yeah. What did you think of? This is always interesting when you're in a breakaway and there's 2 teammates. We saw it a few times throughout the whole 3 weeks. But what did you think of Jorgensen's tactics with Wout? How did you see that unfold? And do you think that was well done enough from him and them?
Yeah. Look, I think a lot of the time, as a couch potato watcher, we underestimate the fatigue that a lot of the riders have, and we should be quite careful about how we criticize. And I'm guilty of this as well. I'd be yelling at the telly, why isn't he attacking, or why isn't he counter-attacking? And the probable reason is, if he hasn't been told not to, is because he can't. And if you had the fitness to do whatever you wanted, then all those scenarios should play out that way. But there are times when the riders are too stuffed. They just can't actually do much more than they're doing. And it's all very well for us to sit there and say, oh, he should have done this, or he should have done that. And I think they would if they could. And it's like when you're in a bunch in a breakaway and someone sits on and someone else sits on, and one of those people who's sitting on can roll turns and the other one who sits on can't. And you've got to work out which person's telling the truth. And you only find that out at the end when the person who can sit on, doesn't roll a turn and out sprints you. Whereas the person who can't roll a turn and sits on doesn't do anything in the final. And then you work out who's actually bluffing and who's not. So it's hard to work out whether the tactics are there, but they just can't implement them.
Yeah, the reason I ask you is it's not just a biased opinion. Your race tactic IQ is off the charts, and I say it's not biased because I've been told my whole life from all your competitors and everyone we know who raced against you at crits, road races, national titles, where you just won countless times, that your racing IQ was out of this world. And I think that that was a big lesson you taught me growing up, was whenever we're watching these races, I used to say that a lot. I used to say, why isn't he going? What's he doing? And you're saying, Jordy can't. He's not going because they can't. That's if they could go, they would. And you have to really drill that into yourself, that if they're not going, it's because they can't. And Sarah actually said that in the podcast last week, where she was going, she was with Marlon Reusser, and they were breaking away. And she's going, oh, her turn's not as strong as I thought it would be here. And she realized to herself, well, that if she could go stronger, she would, because they're in a breakaway right now. So that means she's on a limit. And Sarah going, well, it's not too strong for me. That means I have good legs. So that's the kind of conclusion you can draw from that.
Yeah, and, I think Jorgensen, he's a fighter. And he was on his knees, honestly. He kept fronting up day after day. And look, I felt sorry for him, because Sepp Kuss was meant to be, the other person who was going to take a lot of the responsibility, and Sepp just wasn't at the level for this tour, unfortunately. And so he really didn't contribute a lot, and it would have grated on Sepp being unable to contribute. He's a Welter Tour winner, so he has won a Grand Tour, so he's no mug, but he just wasn't on the right level. And you could say that, a lot of the field, the guys, some of them got their form exactly right. Some have just got it not quite right. And I think Wout was getting better as the tour went on. And it showed at the end. And his determination to get something out of the tour was when you're racing up that hill, you just put yourself in this mindset. Pog's won everything. He's already won the tour. And he's against a guy who he knows is not going to give up, because I want to win this stage. So Pog's got to change his mindset to, no, I'm not letting you win this stage. I'm going to I'm going to beat you no matter what. He's also got those people saying, oh, you're boring. He's got all these things in his mind. Not that he's thinking about that, but you think about the mindset of a person who's actually won everything in this 3 weeks and a person who's won nothing. I just think that Wout had more to win and to lose than Pog did.
Yeah, that would make sense. We can't. Often when we hear interviews from the athletes, they are human. They're not aliens like us, especially they perform like aliens. And they do in these interviews talk about the same things we're talking about. And unfortunately, there was a lot of talk about is Pogacar clean this tour? Because his dominance is just outrageous. There's a lot of talk, online about it. And Pogacar himself was getting involved in it. I saw this viral video, trying to dissect his tactics, and this guy was defending him, saying this all seems reasonable, and he actually had liked the post. So this is the middle of the tour. So they are seeing and hearing this. They're not completely immune to it unless they're locking their phone away. So these things would be playing on their mind. My last question for this is: do you think that if it was closer and Vingegaard was only 50 seconds down on Pogacar or under a minute or something, that the race would still neutralize it with 50k to go? Or do they say, you guys need to race this stage, no matter how dangerous it is? Vingegaard could break away for 50 seconds here. So what do you think they do there?
Yeah, I definitely think they would have considered that, Jordan. The fact that he was so far ahead, no one likes to see, as I said earlier, no one likes to see someone lose the tour because of an incident. But yeah, I think if it was closer, there's no way they were going to do that. I would think they would have a different outcome. It's all very well for them to sit there and say, "Oh no, this is what we would do no matter what the scenario." I disagree. I think if it had been, within 20 or 30 seconds, it's all on here, and they've selected that race intentionally to have an outcome that wasn't going to be predictable like a sprint. When you finish on the Champs-Élysées, there's only 5 or 6 riders who can win. When you do a circuit like this, it's no different to a one-day stage. And, of course, Pog is dominating, so they probably regretted it when they saw him dominate the Tour in the first 2.5 weeks, saying, oh, no, we've made a mistake here because he's just going to win this stage as well. Yeah. But it turns out that that's not what happened. And no one's guaranteed a victory. And Johan Bruneel said this, and you mentioned this to me before we started, that it is so hard to win a stage. You just don't understand how difficult it is to win a stage. And because, Cavendish has won 36, and what's Pog up to?
21, I think.
Something like 23. Yeah. I'd have to check. But he still wants to win stages, and he wants to win the Tour. And we should talk about that a little bit. I think he's matured a bit, and he wasn't so gung-ho this time. And I think Vingegaard's form caused him to be a little bit more defensive rider this year, whereas when he's winning so easily in other one-day races and tours, he can be a bit more blasé about having a crack, and we had a crack at him about that. And I think he rode really clever this year, and still he was trying to win stages. There's no doubt about that. But he was, he even said, defense first, and then if there's an opportunity, then I'll try and win the stage. Whereas before it was like, gung-ho attitude, and I think that bit him in the bum, at least one year where he just cracked one of those stages, and they went up the same stage this year. One of them was Hortican. Can't remember what the other stage was, where he just said, "I'm dead." He went on the radio and said, "I'm dead." Yeah. And they rode that stage again this year, and he won that stage. So, and he won Hortican as well. So, I think it was a really mature rider, and I think it was a well planned out, even though he had Almeida out of the Tour, so there's a lot of positives we should give, a lot of kudos to UAE for the way they rode the Tour, and they totally dominated it. And I really feel that, without his right-hand man, it was a harder Tour for him to win. And Vingegaard's form wasn't that far away, and he actually beat him on one stage. And had that hadn't have been the Ineos guy, what's his name? Aronson up the road. Vingegaard would have won that stage, and he would have beaten Pog on one of those stages. So, I've jumped around a little bit, but I'm really I want to congratulate Pog for a much more mature performance, I feel, and I think he really understands how hard stage tours are to win. And now that he's won 3 tours, and I'd love to see him do the welter and have a crack at that, and see if the teams, we talked about this before, see if the teams would try some more tactics, work together a bit more. But that's a topic we can discuss.
Yeah, honestly, I think there's a bit of conflict of interest with the Vuelta, because I think Almeida has had that pegged all year as his chance to be a GC leader, but at the same time, everyone's going, "You're this good, Pog. Go to the triple. No one's done it before." So I don't. At this stage, there's been no talk of it, but that would be from UAE themselves. I mean, there's lots of talk around it, but that would be very interesting. Geraint Thomas said on his own podcast, because last year Pog won 6 stages, and then this year he won 3 in the first 11 or whatever. And everyone's going, he's going to get Cavendish's record easily. He's going to win 6 stages a year. And Geraint Thomas said, that's true if it keeps going like this, but the stages aren't easy, exactly what you're saying. And you've got to celebrate your wins when you get them, because he didn't win a stage after that. You never know what's going to happen. And we talk about this with athletes all the time. Like, celebrate your peak form all the time, because stuff tends to always interrupt at some point. And, we saw this with Egan Bernal. He dominated a tour at 19 years old or 21 or however young he was. And everyone said, well, that's the tour for the next 6 years. This kid is that good. He's going to win 6 in a row. And he had a bad crash. He hasn't been the same rider since. And so Pog's 27. If he keeps his dominance for a few years and keeps winning 3 or 4, yeah, he'll get close to Cavendish. But it takes a lot to get that consistency and for nothing to go wrong, especially in a sport like cycling. We've seen it with Jonas. We've seen it with Remco. We've seen it with Roglic every Grand Tour. Something can easily go wrong. He makes his own life Pog, and he doesn't crash too often, which really helps him. But again, it doesn't take much. So you can't take his wins for granted now. People are just saying, oh, it's boring now. He's going to win for the next 10 years. Well, not true at all. Absolutely not true.
No, things happen. And, you would have thought that out of the last 4 years, the way he's riding, he would have won the last 5 years. He would have won the last 5 tours. Well, he's only won 3 out of the last 5. And he did win 4 stages of this tour.
Okay.
And so his odds are, if he does that average of 4 each, but he's got to stay healthy. He's got to not be injured. Look at Remco. How bad an accident has Remco had 3 times now? And, Vingegaard's had a shocking accident. Wout's had some shocking accidents. And, you call it bad luck or poor riding or whatever you want to call it. That's the fact that those things happen. And Pog has had a wrist injury, and the year he had the wrist injury, he didn't win the tour. So you just can't say that that's a foregone conclusion. You've still got to do the preparation. You've still got to win each stage, ride each stage, and put time into your opponents. And, it's a whole process. And so I just don't think that's true, that it's a foregone conclusion that he could, get... Oh, I think it'd be magnificent if someone can get close to Cavendish's his number, but I just don't think that's on his mindset. I think he would be rather winning tours than the most stage wins ahead of that. That would be my first process, that he would try to win, almost what Lance has done, sort of thing, and prove that it can be done legally, if that's the case. So I think there's other different goals, and it's always good for us to talk about it. But definitely, he has got the ability to win many more tours. But we did see Vingegaard. I think if he, next year he will be. He's come back from an injury himself, and I think had he not had that interrupted preparation, I think it would have been a lot closer than people are actually witnessing.
I'm always surprised at the comments when people say it's a blowout or whatever. I am just more surprised when it's closer, because over 3 weeks of racing, you can't believe that 3 weeks, 180 kilometer stages, 200 stages, that guys are within a minute of each other after 21 stages. You just, the amount that can go wrong in a single day, you assume it could blow out to 3 or 4 minutes or have bigger swings, which it just doesn't tend to, which I guess is the level of riding they have now, that everyone's just so consistent. But yeah, Jonas, he had an unbelievable tour. And in his own words, he basically had 3 bad days, and that's what cost him. And the other days, he was in his best form ever. And they were both riding records up these climbs. And he was probably stronger on Pog on one of the stages, didn't get the stage win. But I don't think Jonas did much wrong. I think that Pogacar is just generally pretty unbeatable. And Visma probably just, I'm going to use the word expended unnecessary energy, too much spread out throughout the tour, and didn't use their team to their full capacity. I don't know if they made any major red flag crucial mistakes. It was just a lot of little things I think added up. That would be my summary. What do you think of Visma's team tactics?
Yeah, I thought they had a good team. Having Yates, Sepp Kuss, and Jorgensen, I think was really good. And of course you've got Wout van Aert there. So there's a good list of 5 out of your 8 riders that are pretty damn solid riders. And I would agree. I just don't think the way the race panned out, a lot of their decisions backfired a little bit, even though they had the right strategies. I think that at the end of the day, you had to use Sepp Kuss a bit more, but maybe he didn't have the form. You needed to send him up the road, especially when Almeida was unavailable for Pogacar. That's when they had the advantage, and they had Yates, Kuss, and Jorgensen, and the idea is for as you said, your second best rider needs to be really close in GC, which is what Jorgensen was early on, and you need to use him up the road. And they tried to do that, but it ended up destroying Jorgensen because he was in too many of those events. You need, like Sepp Kuss did at the Welter, which actually got him the win at the Welter when Roglic and Vingegaard were the main, they already had 2 GC riders, and Sepp Kuss went up the road and no one else in the field worried about Sepp Kuss, and he ended up getting a 4 or 5 minute lead, and they couldn't drag it back, and he ended up winning the Tour, even though Jorgensen, Roglic and Vingegaard were his teammates and were probably better than him. But that's what my opinion should have been. They should have been using Sepp Kuss, Yates and Jorgensen to really make sure that UAE had to chase down everything, and that would have tired them out rather than the tactic of sitting on the front like they did do a previous year when Vingegaard did win. They literally rode Pog off his legs, but he's a different rider now. And he was able to just sit in. It was just like that. It was like Pog had his own team, except they were in yellow, sitting on the front for him. They weren't tiring him out at all. They needed a different tactic, and I got disappointed when they kept doing that day after day. And maybe the fact that Kuss, Yates, and Jorgensen weren't good enough, but then Yates comes out and wins the stage. So I think you're hedging your bets a bit when Wout won the last stage, which was over by then, but to have Yates in that good a form from the Giro, I just think that they might look back and say, I don't know if we handled that advantage that we had with those 3 really good riders to our advantage to put pressure on UAE.
Really good points, and let's clarify this. Do you think? How do you beat Pogacar? And the follow-up question is he actually beatable? And to start with, he's undoubtedly almost unbeatable right now. So no matter what tactics they were doing, it's at the end of the day, it's Jonas versus Pogacar, and Jonas wasn't good enough. And so regardless of all the team tactics, that has to be said. But I will say that Jonas himself has said, I don't think winning this tour was unachievable. And again, I just had 3 bad days, but I was really informed of everything else. And so to hear that from him, the rest of us are just going, Pogacar's an alien. He's unbeatable. He doesn't have a bad day, but it would only take one this tour, and it would have been even again. He managed to not crack at all, and to be honest, he hasn't cracked for what seems like 20 races in a row now. He just is literally unbeatable. But I guess my question stands. So knowing those 2 things, knowing that he is an alien, but Jonas thinks it's achievable, how do you beat Pogacar?
Well, I just think, and we did talk about this, I think a lot of the problem is the ego from teams. My thing would be, we need to actually gang up on UAE. And I'm talking about pretty much the whole peloton. And if the peloton's got the belief that he's too good and they're in it for just stage wins, then you can't do anything about it. But if the other teams, such as UAE, such as Bora, or any of the other teams that thought they had a chance, like Bora had a 2-pronged attack with Roglic and and who was the other guy? Lipovic, sorry. They had a really big opportunity there, and we didn't know what form both of them were in. But Roglic is a previous Grand Tour winner, So you would expect, and he's left Visma to go to a team to be the number one rider. So I was a bit disappointed in him, to be fair, and I was almost cheering Lipowitz on to be the number one rider. And I was interested in their tactics, where when Lipowitz was struggling a little bit, Roglic didn't go back and help when he was actually coming behind him in the general classification. So my point about getting the teams to work together has a real problem, because of each of the teams don't want to sort of, and I don't know if it's in the rules anyway, that you get together and try to gang up on another team, but that is the only way when someone's dominating like that. If you've got people who are within a minute or so, 2 minutes or so, up to 4 minutes, that they can be sent up the road, and UAE have to respond every time. So if you've got someone in second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth, up to 4 or 5 minutes, and if you keep sending them up the road, the other teams can then counter as well. If that person gets caught, other teams with their GC, that wasn't happening. And if Pog ends up winning 3-4 tours in a row, they're going to have to resort to this tactic where they have to work together as 14 other teams against UAE, so that it gives someone else a chance. So UAE can't counter every single attack from every other team. So that's just not going to happen. You know what it's like when there's a guy in a one-day race, when there's one guy up the road or one girl up the road, and there's 7 or 8 chasers. Why does the one rider up the road never get caught? It's because those 7 or 8 chasers can't work together. They can't talk it through to say, come on guys, if we just roll together, 7 will beat 1. But they don't. Someone sits on, someone misses a turn, and then someone gets really pissed off because someone's not pulling their weight. So I'm not going to do it either. I'm not going to tow that person to the front. So this is the same theory as it is in the teams. If someone you decide that you're all going to try and gang up on UAE, and then someone from one of the teams doesn't, then it just destroys the whole thing. So my ideal world is that they all get together and gang up, but I just don't think it's ever going to happen. And it just has to be someone who's a second string GC rider in any of the teams to be thrown up the road, who's within 4 minutes, that UAE have to keep responding to. And that's like, Visma had Jorgensen or Course or Yates, and Bora had Roglic and Lipowitz more than Roglic, because they're not going to let Roglic go up the road. And maybe now we know in hindsight, Only, from Picnic Post, we wouldn't have known that at the start, though. If they let him go up the road, they weren't to know that he was going to come fourth overall, and they might have let him go. So there's a lot of tactics that could have been put into place, but it's easy in hindsight.
Yeah, as always. It's so interesting, though, because, I think that we spoke about this with the one-day classics, that strategy of what you're talking about can work really well to stop Pog's domination in one-day races, because he just gets that big jump where people can't go with him up these short, punchy climbs, and then he just time trials away. And we were saying in the one-day classics, stop trying to go with him on those climbs. Everyone blows themselves up by trying to go with him when they're better, and they ride into that red zone and they can't recover. If everyone just stayed in their range, let him go up the road, let him get 20 or 30 seconds, him going into his own red zone, and then if you're all willing to work together, you could time trial and get him back. 7 versus 1 should always win, but again, the likelihood of that happening in an actual race is slim to none.
No, and you and I talked about this, and I said to you, this is exactly what they should let happen when he's on Flesh Malone, or he's on any of the main spring classics. When he attacks, it's always strategic, and he has done a lot of attacks where there've been 40 or 50k solo victories.
Yeah.
The teams, when he attacks, they should just stay in their zones, as you said, and work together. Leave him out there. And we've done that many times in club races. If some guy attacks, and the rest of the group, as long as they all decide to work together, let that guy out there. It happens to be the best rider in the world, and he possibly could ride that well against 6 or 7 riders. But if you work together well enough, you can actually leave the guy out there, and he'll be that exhausted by the time you catch him. He's no longer a factor in the race. And I think that is a tactic that should be employed.
So teams need to somehow work together and multi-prong attack. And once again, if he's still too good, he's still too good. Visma went very aggressive in that first 10 days, and that did cost them. And the working on the front, you do get that tactic, but UAE had the yellow jersey very early on, and this has happened a lot the last few years. I would say make them spend as many hours as possible on the front, every single day. Get them out in the wind. That hurts them at the back of week 2 and week 3, and we saw it with Jake Alula. By the end of week 3, they had no riders left to help Ben O'Connor defend his top 10 place. And so it's the same thing. Visma let, I think, UAE off the hook a lot with this strategy, with this aggressive strategy. Easy to say in hindsight, it has worked for them before, but I just think when Pog's in yellow, just do not give UAE any sort of respite. Just say, you guys are in yellow, you have to ride on the front, you expend as much energy day after day and wear them down that way. Let themselves wear themselves down. And on that that double GC strategy, I wonder if teams will have to try and employ some sort of strategy where Visma go out and buy Lipowicz or buy Oscar Onley or the next best GC contender on top of having Yates and Jorgensen, or maybe if they've really committed it all in on the tour, they keep someone like Yates super fresh for the tour or something like that, where they generally have someone that could almost be a GC contender that Pogacar has to watch both of them. And we saw that work years ago in, I think it was maybe the 2008 Tour de France, where CSC Saxo Bank had the Schleck brothers and the guy who ended up winning, Carlos Sastre, and they refused to say the whole tour which one of those three guys was the leader for the GC. And on one of the days, Sastre went, and everyone was looking at the Schleck brothers, and Sastre got enough time that he ended up winning the Tour de France. So
another example, George, of that is the Sky team when they had Wiggins, Froome. Richie Port, Geraint Thomas, and all those, 3 of those guys ended up winning the tour, and they had them all in the one team at once. And so that theory you're talking about worked. But I think Jumbo have that, Visma, have that at the moment. Yeah. I think but they just didn't use it well enough, and I just don't think Sepp Kuss was in the form that he needed to be. He wanted to be out or needed to be. So I think they had the right idea with Yates, Jorgensen and Kuss, but I just don't think they're in good enough form to be legitimate contenders to be chased down. And unfortunately, and Roglic wasn't either. Roglic really wasn't in great form, compared to what he's been at before. I mean, the good thing was he actually finished the first tour in four goes. So, but I didn't think much of his attitude. It just seemed, when he was interviewed, he just seemed like he had a blasé, not really caring much about what's going on. So, I'm not sure about that.
Your point before about Yates winning the stage, it just brings up an interesting discussion. I wonder what the mindset was around Visma, because they love sending someone up on the break, and the speeds they're riding these climbs now is just pretty much every single climb, including the Hall category runs, they're riding above 20 kilometers an hour. And we know that anything above 18 kilometers an hour is a huge draft gain. So if you are isolated, it actually is a big issue. And so to have someone up and then to come back to you and for you to get some slipstream assistance up some of these climbs is a massive, massive advantage. So that is a good strategy. But I think, once again, if Visma are really all in on Jonas winning the tour, they're not having Yates win stage 10. That's an all-out effort from him. They're preserving as much energy as possible. They don't have to be on the front. They're making every single UAE rider do some work on the front and expend energy. So I wonder what their internal strategy was around all that, because every single second of energy counts. If you need, every second counts in the tour. So if you want Jonas to be within 4 minutes, I don't think that Yates winning a stage on stage 10, I think that's conflicting interests. And we talk about that a lot with our own athletes, that if you want to be good in the Ironman, doing a bunch of Olympic distance training and racing, or 5K running events and trying to train for that isn't going to be conducive directly to your Ironman.
Yeah, I agree with all your points. And I do think that they sent him up the road for that reason. I think he was there to help Jonas when it counted, but it turned out that they didn't even want to reach the front of the group. And that could have been UAE's tactic as well, Jordy, is to, we don't need to win the stage. All I have to do is defend and ride beside Jonas. Pog just has to ride beside Jonas. And he'd already had a big enough lead. And as it turned out, Yates was an opportunist, and he ended up, getting the victory, which is a really great result. To win it, as we said earlier, to win any stage of the tour is unbelievable. So he grabbed that opportunity. So it was. I just don't think. I don't think they had the intention of that happening. I just think that's how it panned out. It's always easy in hindsight to look back and say, well, that tactic was, why did you do that? Well, we don't know what the directors are saying in the car. We're just surmising what we think is going on. But I think, I think that tactic was right. But and look, the fact that the GC contenders didn't really chase down the front of the race meant that Yates had the freedom. So I don't think we can criticise that one too much. As a result of the tactics.
A lot of theories here as well, and we're kind of talking about, we're just guessing in theories of how do you beat Pogacar, and we're kind of conflicting in our own advice. We're saying, don't send Yates up the road. He needs to be there helping Jonas, or actually send Yates up the road so Pogacar has to chase. It's like they both can't be true. So we know that, again, it's a hard one because their tactic to try and wear Pogacar down was smart, because the theory is he can just jump. Jonas' weakness against him, he can't really go with those monster attacks, although he did very well this tour compared to others where there was only a couple where Pog got away. So you want to wear him down so he can't jump. But at the same time, let UAE do the work, but then he gets to the climb a little bit fresher. So which one is it? It's very hard to say.
Yeah, look, and we could talk about this all day, but there were some other exciting stages that we should really jump into. And I really enjoyed the tour. I'm actually enjoying the first three stages so far that we've listened to. By the time this podcast comes out, it'll probably be near the end, but it's a really great time, isn't it, in July, watching the women's Giro, now the men's tour, and now the women's tour as well. So the cycling's been fantastic.
Let's go through some of our other favorite moments and stages and just cycling analysis and coaching analysis. I do want to start with stage 20, the day before the last stage. That was like a one-day classic. That was so much fun to watch. It was an epic breakaway. Classic classic cycling racing of strategy, guys jumping. There was one point where the breakaway was split into 4 groups of 2 or 3 that were 7 seconds, 11 seconds, and it was a straight line, and you saw this awesome image of they're all 80 meters away from each other, but they can't catch each other. It was so fun to watch. And then Caden Groves with some brilliant capitalizing on classic cycling ego you're talking about, where two guys just want to look at each other and played a bit too smart, and he just rides off the front to the stage win.
Look, we're very biased because he's Australian, but he had Harry Sweeney up the road, who ironically they both live in Andorra, and they're really good mates, even though they're in opposite teams. So they train together, and I think it was a bittersweet moment. I heard an interview, Sweeney's, I loved the attack that he made, and I actually thought he was going to go on and win it, and with the guys all arguing with themselves back behind. But a couple of really key moments where Caden Groves really put an effort in to bridge the gap across to Sweeney, and then the race changes. Because he held 7 or 8 seconds for about 5 or 6K. Yeah. And, no one was willing to do that last little bridge. And I love it. People are willing to lose races rather than win races. It's just, whereas Caden wasn't. We need to get across to him. I know how good he is because he knows him. He knows how well he can ride. So he's just saying, if we let this guy go, he's going to ride away again. So, so that was one scenario. And then, what's the guy's name? Frank from who ended up coming second. And I was texting you the whole Vandenbroek saying, if this guy wins, it'll make me sick because he's just playing the ultimate poker game, which tactically was really clever, but he just did not do a turn, and he was the one causing all of the splits because he just refused to do a turn. He just sat on the back. When there were 3 of them were away, 2 were working, and he sat on the back, and they were away. They were in front.
That's the race.
So that was just bad tactics in my point of view because it was now down to 3, and if he was not going to do a turn, those other 2 were going to sit up, which they ended up doing. The race came back together again. Vandenbroek ended up getting second, but I feel he could have probably won had he had a different tactic rather than just, he could have actually just rolled over and stayed away, because he had the strength at the end, because you saw him break away from the group to come second solo, but But I love Caden Groves. Just look, those guys are arguing, I'm going, and for a sprinter to ride solo like that for so long, that just shows how important threshold riding is. And for all those people who are cyclists who think that, just being a smart crit racer or a road racer is all you need to be able to ride threshold. You need to be able to time trial. And I can't even remember how many times we've talked on this podcast about people winning solo. And it's because they've got that threshold ability to hold a steady state for 10K, 20K, 10 minutes, 30 minutes. And we saw stage 3 of the women's tour, the Jayco Alula girl literally held 10 seconds for the last 11K. And the bunch, they mucked it up, and she ended up winning. She didn't win because the bunch mucked it up. She won because she was brave. She won because she had good threshold. She won because she kept her head and she kept pushing. She didn't give up even when they got to 5 seconds, and she just kept going, and it turned out to be a great decision. And you don't know the mistakes that the bunch are going to make. So you've just got to hang in there, and you never know what's going to happen. And we're talking about this stage with Caden Groves. It was well deserved. He was the best rider on the day, and he deserved to win that. And that doesn't happen very often. And I couldn't have been happier for him.
What an emotional win as well. And just in that once they caught Harry Sweeney, that last category climb, guys were giving it such a crack. There was 4 guys in there who went for it to try and go for victory and just couldn't get away. And Caden Groves himself, not a climber, tried to break away himself. And there was one guy, I can't remember who it was, but I was so impressed, where a bunch of attacks went, and then there was this lull because everyone is gassed, and they've all caught up and they're gassed. And then the gutsiest person at that level attacks next. And this guy went and he got 7 meters and then couldn't go. But I just thought he's clearly got no legs, and he's just gone, if I'm going to win, now's the time. And that is racing strategies, that when everyone's hurting the most, that's when you need to go. You don't go when it's easy for everyone, because everyone else is finding it easy as well.
Yeah, that's spot on, Jord. And look, the irony was Wellens and Jorgensen got dropped from that main 10 riders, or I can't remember exactly the number, and they ended up being 30 or 40 seconds behind for 20 to 30 kilometres. And all of a sudden, because everybody was mucking around, Jorgensen and Wellens got back to the group. And I just thought, this is going to be hilarious. Wellens could probably win this if they keep mucking around. And it was another example of just never giving in and seeing those guys get back to have another opportunity to have another go at it, but they were exhausted. When they done all their efforts to get back to the group. So that second last stage had everything in it. And for Groves to win, that's him won a stage in all 3 tours now. And for a sprinter, that's pretty impressive. Not many people have done that.
Yeah, for sure. There was a bunch of those hilly stages where it was 3 category 3s and 1 category 4, 1 category 2, something like that. They were just like one-day classics. Stage 11 was another one, which was just unreal. That was the one where Pogacar crashed with 3K to go, and that breakaway was away, and Wout and Van der Poel were catching them. And then those 2 guys did the opposite of what we're saying. They didn't let their egos get in the way. They worked together to the last 500 meters, because Van der Poel would have caught them if they didn't. And that was awesome to see. And that was such a well-deserved win. And Van der Poel, he did get a stage win, which was great, but he had 2 heartbreaking losses and he's just, we talk about this all the time. Him, Sagan, Van Aert, they've got more seconds than first, but that's what makes them champions.
Yeah, and Abrahamson and the other guy, I can't remember the guy who beats name. You'll probably tell me, but they did exactly what we've hoped. Work together till the last 200 meters, and then let the best man win, because you've got one of the best riders in the world, Mathieu van der Poel, chasing you, and they held 20 seconds for, I can't remember how long it was, but Van der Poel was trying everything to bridge the gap, but just couldn't. And that was a great victory. And I love Abrahamson, the way he trains, and he is such a hard trainer. And some of his training sessions are epic. He sits on the trainer and in the Northern Hemisphere there in the winter, and he just does massive trainer sessions, and he's got pressure on the pedals. And it's a great example of, you can use indoor facilities, because he lives in, the Scandinavian countries where it's snowing most of the year. And sure, he goes to camps and high altitude training, but where most people have got some really nice weather, he's on the trainer, pressure on the pedals, and this guy is a weapon. He will win a lot more stages than he'll lose. So it was really great that he won a stage. I couldn't have been happier, and I love it when a group of guys work together and let the best man win. I felt sorry for Mathieu van der Poel, but yeah, look, his stage 2 win was pretty epic too.
Again, it's just like a one-day classic stage. It was all the one-day classic guys in a breakaway, and he beat Pogacar. So.
Yeah, it was good. And look, Alpecin had a great start. Philipsen won stage 1, Van der Poel won stage 2, and had the yellow jersey. And you're thinking that Alpecin have got this great tour ahead of them. Next thing you know, Philipsen crashes. He's out of the tour. They're not going to win any more sprints, and they've really got no one left to sort of try and win stages, which is where Caden Groves came to the rescue at the end. They back-ended the tour, didn't they? They won the stage 1 and the second last stage of the tour, and Van der Poel was so close to winning a few more. But they had a great tour, really. They got 3 stage wins, and they had yellow jersey for 4 days, was it? So I was talking to you before. There was probably 14 teams who didn't get anything out of the tour. So as Johan Brunel said, it's so hard to win anything in these tours. So, even when you look at Remco, people will say, was it, disaster? No, he won the time trial. He won a stage. And, that was an epic time trial to win that. And, that even though he wasn't quite in form, he's such a great time trialist that he still managed to find a way to win that. And that he only won that by seconds. It wasn't a great deal in it. And Luke Plapp, the Australian, was leading at all the checkpoints for the majority of that race. And the easier part was the second half of that of that actual stage. It was the fastest section. And it just showed that if you get the execution a little bit wrong, and I feel sorry for Luke. I think he did a great job, and he's a great time trialer. And he's going to win some time trials. You mark his name down, but just got his execution a little bit wrong and went out a little bit hard, and he ended up 9th, and he was leading at the end of stage 1 by 30 seconds. Time check 1. I didn't mean to say stage 1 there. Time check 1 and time check 2. He was winning for majority of, and he sat in that hot seat for hours. And look, I felt that that's an example for those listening, that if even though he's an unbelievably great time trial, you still can get the execution a little bit wrong, and he would probably not have won the tour that stage. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that he would have not finished 9th. He would have probably finished somewhere around 3rd, 4th, or 5th had he executed a little bit better. So I'm not saying he would have, his execution cost him, but he would have been closer to the podium because that's where he deserves to be. He is such a talent.
Yeah, you can see who, like, we can't see the power data, but you can just assume based on placings the measure of effort. And to be 30 or 40 or 50 seconds up on these done time trials, the first couple of checkpoints shows how hard you're riding. You just can't sustain that, and that's a big swing to then lose by 50 seconds or whatever it was. And that's a minute and a half in the back section to lose to those guys. So that does show a huge change in effort. It'd be interesting to see the power, but we don't have access to that. And I wanted to touch on Remco, and it ties into kind of what you're talking about with Alpecin. I thought Alpecin were just a really good representation of the typical journey of an athlete. They start off the tour on big high notes, and it looks like they're going to dominate. And Philipsen, he's so good in sprints. But then, and you go celebrate your wins, because then horrific crash, he's out of the tour. Van der Poel was looking unbelievable, but gets pneumonia, leaves the tour. They're 2 best riders, And so it's this up and down journey that we see with all athletes. And then they finish it off. They stay in it. They finish it off with Caden Groves winning. So it turns out to be a really good tour. But similar with Remco's story, he put a great post up, which I think all athletes should really pay attention to and listen to. And everyone's asking what's happening on the hills. He's collapsing, and he abandons. And he put out a big post saying, basically, since his crash last year, it's been a rush to get back to form with all eyes on the tour. And And in hindsight, rushed too quick and did everything one step ahead of where he kind of needed to be to force his body and his mind to try and get ready. And it just took too much of him. And he never felt right. He never felt good. And easy in hindsight, but he's just saying, now that I leave the tour, I know that, I've just been rushing for 8 months. And we talk about this athletes all the time, when you're coming back, you just got to do the right things. And if you try and come back and push too early, you can delay your return to peak form by 8 months, but if you just take that month to get it right and do it properly and build your base back up properly, you might cost yourself a month or two at the start, but then in 6 months' time, you are in that peak form you want. And I thought that was a really, really important lesson. And I'm so glad he gave us that insight as to what was happening mentally and physically for him.
Yeah, we've got to be careful here. And this is their job. This is their career. And a lot of the podcast that we aim at is for age groupers. And it's not their job. It's not their career. And so it's even more important that you live to fight another day. And you don't rush your comeback if you've been sick or injured or you've been away from the sport, and you pick a race that's too close. You don't give yourself enough time. And these are the things that the messages we're trying to get across. And even guys like Remco, who are at the elite level, need time. You can't rush form. You can't rush your physical fitness. It's worse as a runner. At least as a bike rider, you can really train hard. As a runner, you can't actually train hard until your body copes and adapts to the running load from actually running. On the bike, you've got the bike holding you up, whereas a runner, your impact on the road is every footstep you take, every stride you take. So the impact is worse. So you can't just resume from an injury or illness to run hard. Whereas on a bike, you can actually, the impact's less. So to have Remco, it probably wasn't the right event for him. He needed to probably give himself another month or two, and the Welter's probably what he should have aimed at. But when you're a professional and this is your career, the tour is the tour, and you want to be in it. But as an age grouper, there's always going to be another race. You're in it for the long haul as an age grouper. You're not in it for as a pro for a window of 4 or 5 years. And for some pros, it's 15 years. But for the majority, the average is 4 to 5 years. So you've got to take every opportunity you can. Whereas as an age grouper, you're thinking long term. You want to be in the sport that you've chosen, whether it's cycling, marathon running, or fun running, or triathlon. You want to be in it because it's enjoyable. It's good for your health and fitness, and you love competing. You want to be in it for a long time, and so you should be careful about putting races in front of you that are too close, that you're not prepared for. As long as you understand the consequences that you won't be performing as well as you could if you waited another 2 or 3 months and put a race further back. So if you're okay coping with the consequences, I certainly aren't. I'm definitely not one of those people who, if I'm ready for a race, then I'm not where I want to be. I can't handle the consequences of performing poor, even though I know the reasons why. I still don't cope well with that. And so that's a hard thing to do as well. And anybody who's competitive, when they put a number on, they just expect to be as well as the best person they can. And the message we're trying to say is you have to expect to be the best person with the form you have at that particular time. Not, Remco's form to win the World Time Trial Champion title, the Olympic Games time trial, and the road race time trial at the Olympic Games. That's the best form of his ever career. He's not in that form right now. Otherwise, he'd be performing better. And it's a stage race, not a one day race or an individual time trial. And he's already proven in this tour where his form isn't that good, he still won the time trial. So there's a lot to unpack there with an athlete who's, you've got to have the mindset of, I can't be perfect all the time. And consequences of being underprepared are, can you cope with it? And if you can't, don't do those races. Wait till you're better prepared. That's the message I think we should be sending.
With all that said, I don't think it was the wrong decision for him to race, because his form showed that he's still good enough to win the individual time trial. He's still right there. And unfortunately for those top 4 guys, which was supposed to be Pog, Vingegaard, Remco, and Roglic, you've got to be at 100% to win. You're a couple of percent off, and you can't keep up on those mountains. But sometimes you can ride yourself into form, and so his form was right there. It was good enough to win the ITT. And so, you never know what's going to happen. Sometimes he over 1 or 2 weeks, he could ride himself into form. But I don't think it was a mistake, but he just halfway through he said, "No, I don't have it."
Yep, and I agree. Look, you look at any team sports, any the NBA or the English Premier League, or Liverpool can lose to the bottom of the English Premier League if they're just 5% off on any given day. You just can't. You have to be at your best the whole time, otherwise you're vulnerable to a loss. And it's you're going to have more losses than you're going to have wins in sport like cycling or triathlon or running. So that's why your own personal performance is the thing you should be. Vingegaard would have to be happy with his performance. He couldn't have done any better. He didn't win, and that's what he's being measured on. Did you win or lose? But even as a professional, you have to walk away saying, well, I did as well as I possibly could, given the fitness level that I've got at this particular moment. I'm determined to not let that happen next year, but you can't say that it won't, because who's to say he won't crash again? But riders are crashing so regularly now that it's not a given that you can have a perfect lead up to any event. And so all those age groupers out there who've had an accident or been sick, you have to be a bit kinder to yourself. And your next race may be the most important thing for you, but you've got to understand you'll get to that race at the best level of fitness with the time you've had. And it may not be your perfect level. You may have been stronger in the past, but you've got to accept that, you can only perform with what the form you have on the day. And if you can't do that, you probably should question whether you should do the race.
I just want to finish off by talking about a couple of other riders. The rider of the Tour for me, outside of Ben Healy, who deservedly won the most combative of the whole race, unbelievably exciting Tour and just great riding from him. But my personal rider of the Tour was Arensman. He came second on that stage 10 to Yates from that breakaway. And I was watching and he was just always there with Yates, and he wasn't going backwards. He was actually catching him, and I thought he was going to take that stage. He just lost time on that jump that Yates had. Yates came into that corner, very smart racing. Yates said afterwards that he'd ridden that corner, he knew exactly what was coming, and he didn't expect to get such a jump, but he hit that hard, and he jumped them all by 50 meters, and that ended up being the difference in the stage. And so, very good racing from Yates. But had that jump not happened, had Aronson had better positioning behind Yates there, I reckon he could have won that stage. Anyway, he comes out the next day, stage 11, and wins. But then more importantly, won against the two titans, the two aliens, Jonas and Pogacar on stage 19, with the most unbelievable performance. And I just loved his interview where he was just going, those guys they're not touchable, and I've just beaten them. I just can't actually believe it. And to walk away with those two stage wins and just such aggressive mountain riding, I thought it was so well deserved, and just so impressed with him.
Yeah, look, he really saved Ineos's Tour, didn't he? And and look, I was a little bit disappointed in the interview after he won stage 14, where they mentioned Ineos and drugs, and I thought that was really disrespectful for him. And that really soured it a little bit. It was great that he actually came back and won another stage. So I just think he is a very aggressive rider. I love the way he actually rides the bike. Guys like him and Healy. And Ben O'Connor, just outstanding to take it to Pogacar and Vingegaard, the two most outstanding riders of the Tour, and have a crack and just not be satisfied with sitting in the bunch, being satisfied with being at the front of the race, but having a go at it. Ben O'Connor's attack, when they all started looking at each other, that was one of the better, smartest moves on the whole Tour. And he got away with the South American, I can't actually think, the Colombian.
Tiny.
I can't remember him. And it was, I think Jorgensen got away as well, but just didn't have the legs to go. There was three. My memory is a little bit dim on exactly what happened, because I was cheering Ben on so much. And that was an epic climb and such a well-deserved. I was super rapt for both Healy and O'Connor to win those stages, and for Arensman to win those two stages. So those four breakaway, and Ben O'Connor broke away from Pogacar and from Vingegaard. And I said to you after that stage, imagine when you look back on the highlights and it says Ben O'Connor first on stage 18, second Pogacar, third Vingegaard. That's something you would. These two riders are probably going to be the two epic riders of the century. or Pogacar is. Vingegaard's, a really good rider of his era. But for Ben O'Connor to be on top of those two guys in a stage in the Tour, that would be better than any trophy on the shelf. To have those two names underneath, second and third, it's outstanding.
Especially, if Pog goes on to win 6+ Tour de France, even Vingegaard, he's at the same level, just hasn't had the same sustained success. Unbelievable tour, and so many more highlights. We don't need to go through them all, but I love the 4-ups sprint finish at the top of Ventoux. You just don't see that, where it's 4 guys looking at each other. I thought the quick step teamwork was phenomenal there. You always say if there's 2 riders there in a break, you've got to win that. You can't not win that. That's but right. At the top of Ventoux, it's a bit of a different story. But that quick step teammate of Paris-Pentrier turned himself inside out to get him a good lead out there and make sure that whoever was catching them didn't come and didn't actually get them. And it's hard after 21 stages, you just forget all the details of what happened. But the point is, quick step, they had 2 out of the 4. You really hope they'd take that win, even though everyone's gone for Ben Healy. But that was a great win by Quickstep and Paris-Pentrier.
Yeah, and look, one of the wins, Tim Wellens winning a stage, I think was really. He's such a, I think they used to call one of the riders El Tractor, and he used to sit on the front every stage for years in the Tour, and now Tim Wellens is that rider who can just sit on the front of the bunch and ride solo against the break. On those sprint stages, Tim Wellens is the man who sits on the front for UAE time and time again, and he's riding against four guys in a break, and he manages to hold the same time. It's incredible riding, and for him to win a stage, which is really, that whole team's there for Pog. For him to win a stage was, I think, really well deserved. And look, when you look at the Tour overall, I mean, how many stages were won by the sprint? So we had Philipsen, we had Melia. We had
Milan.
And Melia won 2 actually. And Jonathan Milan won 1. So, I think it was a fair spread actually. And it kept my interest, and the fact that I was in Europe at the time was even better because I was able to watch it during the day, and you were able to watch it in your Bali time, which is good. So I was really happy with how it panned out, and I think the best rider obviously won, and I think there was some really outstanding victories from some other teams who'd be very satisfied with their tour, and a lot of lessons about tactics that and even your own particular form, that you've just got to understand where your form is and whether that's the right training or the right preparation or the right peaking. It's for an age grouper. Even the pros get it wrong, so you've got to be a little bit kinder to yourself when it comes to your events, and that's a big message we want to get from discussions like this. We want to always bring it back to the age grouper and to make sure that they're clear that these guys do it for a living and they make mistakes. So just don't be so harsh on yourself.
That is our unsolicited breakdown on our thoughts on all the tactics and race strategies, and it continues now with the Tour de France Femmes. And if this race pans out anything like last year, it's going to be epic, because I still maintain that the finish to last year was the greatest finish in any Grand Tour that I've ever seen, and I wasn't alive for the 1989 where it came down to the last stage, but to finish on Alpe d'Huez last year and it come down to a matter of seconds, one-on-one, it was where Demi Vollering lost to Cassiodoma, was just ridiculously exciting racing. So we'll see how that all pans out. But a masterclass from UAE, I think that was almost a perfect tour from them. Couldn't have gone any better. But Visma, like we said, they didn't do anything majorly wrong, but perhaps in hindsight, a couple of mistakes that just gave UAE a bit of an advantage. My last question I wanted to ask you was, with more unsolicited advice, if you were the director of Visma right now, what would your message be to the team? What would your kind of feedback be? How would you approach this?
Good question, Jord. I think they should be satisfied that they were really trying a lot of different tactics. And as I said earlier, it's always easy in hindsight to be critical, and so that's probably a bit harsh at times. But definitely riding on the front would be the thing that I would look back and say, well, probably made a bit of a mistake there, even though that tactic had worked before. But yeah, at the end of the day, they still got 2 stage wins out of the Tour in second place on GC. So I think, most people will say, well, look, that's a really good outcome because UAE were just too good and Pog is, a level above. And they would argue that they think Vingegaard is right there. And I would agree if he had a bit more time. But that's just not the way it is. He arrived at the Tour with the form he had. So yeah, if I was the director, I think I'd be disappointed, but I'd be satisfied that, yes, we got second and yes, we won 2 stages. And they won the most epic stage on the final stage. So I think that would actually make them drive home a little bit more comfortable than had Wout not done an unbelievable Wout action and win a stage like that against the seemingly best rider in the world and could be one of the best riders ever to ride a bike. So for Wout to do that one-on-one, I think they would be very happy with that finish.
I don't think we mentioned it, but yeah, we were talking about Jorgensen, but big props to him. I think the reason he wasn't so strong on the climbs, I think he was getting a little bit sick midway through the Tour, which just seems to be unavoidable when they're on their limits like that. But to get himself in the break, to be there for support, to try and help that win happen was just a phenomenal effort. So much fun. We hope you enjoyed this episode and our breakdown. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.